The atmosphere across Port Charles carried an unusual sense of anticipation as Wednesday morning arrived. Beneath the routine rhythm of the city, tensions were building among families whose lives had become intertwined through years of betrayals, romances, secrets, and painful consequences. At the center of the unfolding drama stood Michael Corinthos, a man who had spent months quietly rebuilding his life while watching events around him spiral further out of control. Those closest to Michael had noticed subtle changes in him. The easy trust that once defined his relationships had been replaced by caution. The patience that had always allowed him to forgive others seemed to have limits now. Yet few realized just how much planning had gone into the strategy he was preparing to execute. Michael had reached a point where he believed direct confrontation would accomplish nothing. Every attempt to reason with Willow had ended in frustration. Every effort to preserve peace for the sake of their children had only created opportunities for new misunderstandings. What Michael now wanted was clarity. He wanted the truth to emerge without manipulation, excuses, or emotional distractions. For weeks he had quietly assembled information. Conversations that seemed insignificant to others were carefully noted. Contradictory statements were compared against previous claims. Certain financial records raised questions. Unexpected meetings between familiar faces generated suspicions. The more Michael investigated, the more convinced he became that Willow was hiding something significant. The tragedy was that he had never wanted their relationship to reach this point. There had been a time when Michael viewed Willow as the person who brought stability into his life. Through family wars, criminal conflicts, and personal heartbreak, she represented hope. Their connection had survived obstacles that would have destroyed many couples. Together they had built a family, created dreams, and imagined a future untouched by the darkness surrounding Port Charles. Now that future seemed increasingly distant. At the Metro Court, conversations buzzed among patrons who remained unaware of the storm about to erupt. Carly Spencer moved through the lobby with her usual confidence, but even she sensed that something significant was approaching. Recent developments involving Michael had raised concerns she couldn't completely dismiss. A mother's instincts rarely failed her. Carly understood her son better than most people. She recognized the warning signs whenever he became unusually quiet. Michael was not impulsive like Sonny. He was not reckless like some members of their extended family. When Michael stopped talking, it usually meant he was thinking. When he was thinking, plans were being formed. And when those plans reached completion, the consequences could be devastating. Meanwhile, Willow attempted to focus on maintaining a sense of normalcy. She spent much of the morning handling responsibilities that ordinarily would have occupied her full attention. Yet concentration proved difficult. A persistent feeling of unease followed her everywhere. She couldn't explain it. Nothing specific had happened. No obvious threat had emerged. Still, something felt wrong. Every time her phone vibrated, she expected bad news. Every unexpected glance from a friend seemed loaded with hidden meaning. Every question sounded like an accusation she wasn't prepared to answer. The pressure had become exhausting. Willow repeatedly reminded herself that she had made difficult choices for understandable reasons. She believed her intentions had always been good. Even when mistakes occurred, she convinced herself that protecting loved ones justified her actions. Yet deep down, uncertainty remained. The line separating protection from deception had become increasingly blurred. Across town, Drew Kane continued navigating complications of his own. Recent controversies had damaged relationships that once seemed unbreakable. Public perception shifted rapidly whenever new information surfaced. Allies became critics overnight. Enemies discovered opportunities where none previously existed. Drew understood better than most that secrets never stayed buried in Port Charles. Eventually they surfaced. Eventually they demanded payment. Unfortunately for several people connected to him, that payment might soon become due. As the day progressed, Michael received confirmation that the final piece of his plan had fallen into place. The message arrived shortly before noon. He read it twice before placing his phone back into his pocket. His expression revealed almost nothing. No satisfaction. No excitement. No visible anger. Only determination. The trap was ready. What remained uncertain was how Willow would respond once she realized she had nowhere left to hide. Elsewhere, Nina Reeves found herself increasingly concerned about developments she couldn't fully understand. Recent interactions with Willow had left her troubled. Certain comments seemed unusually defensive. Specific topics were carefully avoided. Nina had spent years repairing damaged relationships and earning trust she once took for granted. Experience taught her to recognize warning signs. Willow was afraid. The question was why. Nina considered pressing for answers but hesitated. Too many previous confrontations had ended badly. Too many attempts to force honesty had only encouraged additional lies. Patience appeared wiser. Unfortunately, patience was becoming a luxury nobody possessed. At General Hospital, routine activity masked growing anxiety among staff members who remained connected to the city's endless dramas. Nurses exchanged updates. Doctors rushed between patients. Administrative concerns demanded attention. Yet beneath the professional atmosphere, rumor circulated. Something was happening with Michael and Willow. Nobody knew exactly what. Everyone had theories. Few understood the truth. As afternoon approached, Michael arranged a meeting designed to appear completely harmless. The invitation contained nothing suspicious. The location seemed ordinary. The purpose sounded reasonable. That was intentional. He needed Willow to arrive without expecting confrontation. If she suspected what awaited her, she might avoid the meeting entirely. Michael could not allow that. Too much depended on what happened next. When Willow eventually received the invitation, she hesitated. The request itself appeared innocent enough. Nevertheless, her unease intensified almost immediately. A warning voice inside her urged caution. Another voice insisted she was overreacting. After several minutes of indecision, she accepted. The choice would prove critical. Not far away, Carly learned enough details to recognize that Michael was moving forward with something significant. Though he refused to explain his intentions completely, she detected the seriousness in his tone. Part of her wanted to intervene. Part of her wanted to protect him from further pain. Yet another part respected the fact that Michael needed to handle this situation himself. Children eventually become adults. Parents eventually step aside. Even when doing so hurts. As evening drew closer, the emotional temperature throughout Port Charles continued rising. Relationships already strained by previous conflicts faced new pressure. Trust became increasingly fragile. Assumptions replaced facts. Fear encouraged poor decisions. Several individuals unknowingly positioned themselves exactly where Michael needed them to be. The carefully constructed chain of events was beginning to function precisely as intended. For Michael, this was never about revenge. At least that was what he told himself. The objective was accountability. The objective was truth. The objective was protecting the future of his family. Yet beneath those noble motivations existed another emotion he struggled to acknowledge. Betrayal. The feeling lingered whenever he remembered promises that had been broken. It surfaced whenever memories of happier times collided with current reality. It intensified whenever he imagined the possibility that Willow had knowingly deceived him for far longer than anyone realized. That pain fueled his determination. By the time sunset painted the Port Charles skyline in shades of orange and gold, all major players were unknowingly moving toward the same destination. Paths that had remained separate for weeks were finally converging. The stage was set. The evidence was prepared. The questions were waiting. Most importantly, Michael was ready. What nobody could predict was how explosive the truth would become once it emerged into the open. Even Michael himself could not fully anticipate the consequences. Plans often looked perfect in theory. Reality rarely cooperated. One revelation could destroy relationships. Another could reshape alliances. A single confession might alter the future of multiple families. As Willow made her way toward the meeting that awaited her, uncertainty shadowed every step. She repeatedly searched for reassurance and found none. The closer she came to her destination, the stronger her instincts warned that something irreversible was about to happen. For months she had managed to stay ahead of difficult questions. For months she had convinced herself that complicated truths could remain hidden. For months she had believed she controlled the narrative. Those assumptions were about to be tested. Inside the quiet room where everything would begin, Michael stood alone and reviewed the evidence one final time. The documents, messages, and testimony he had gathered formed a picture impossible to ignore. Together they created a story that demanded answers. He looked toward the door. Soon Willow would arrive. Soon the confrontation he had postponed for far too long would finally begin. And once the trap closed, there would be no easy escape for anyone involved. The room felt smaller the moment Willow stepped inside. At first glance, nothing appeared unusual. The setting was quiet, professional, and deliberately neutral. No raised voices echoed through the walls. No obvious signs of confrontation greeted her arrival. Yet something about the atmosphere immediately set her on edge. Michael stood near the window, looking calmer than she expected. That calmness frightened her more than anger would have. Over the years, Willow had learned to recognize Michael's emotional patterns. When he was upset, he often attempted to reason through problems. When he was disappointed, he withdrew. When he was hurt, he tried to find understanding before assigning blame. The man standing before her now seemed different. His expression revealed neither anger nor sadness. Instead, there was certainty. And certainty was dangerous. For several moments, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them like a widening crack in a fragile foundation. Willow tried to interpret Michael's posture, searching for clues about why he had arranged the meeting. Nothing prepared her for the first question he asked. It sounded simple. Almost casual. Yet beneath the words lay months of suspicion. Michael wanted clarification regarding several inconsistencies that had surfaced recently. He spoke calmly and methodically, referencing conversations they had shared in the past. Dates. Meetings. Decisions. Explanations. At first, Willow answered confidently. She believed she could explain everything. She had rehearsed explanations countless times inside her own head. But Michael wasn't asking vague questions. He was asking specific questions. Questions supported by information she didn't realize he possessed. The first contradiction appeared within minutes. Willow attempted to clarify a timeline. Michael quietly presented evidence suggesting a different version of events. The discrepancy seemed minor. Yet it mattered. One inconsistency became two. Two became three. Each answer generated another question. Each explanation opened another avenue of inquiry. Gradually, Willow realized she was no longer participating in an ordinary conversation. She was being confronted with a carefully assembled case. Across town, Carly found herself unable to focus on anything else. Her concern for Michael continued growing as the evening progressed. Though she trusted her son's judgment, she worried about the emotional cost of what he was doing. Michael had always carried responsibility heavily. When he loved someone, he committed completely. When those relationships fractured, the damage often lingered long after everyone else moved on. Carly feared this situation might become one of those wounds. A wound that never fully healed. Meanwhile, Nina sensed something changing. Repeated attempts to contact Willow went unanswered. That alone wasn't unusual. The feeling accompanying the silence was. Years of experience taught Nina to trust instincts she once ignored. Every alarm inside her seemed activated simultaneously. Somewhere in Port Charles, a reckoning was beginning. She could feel it. Back at the meeting, Michael continued his methodical approach. He wasn't interested in shouting. He wasn't interested in dramatic accusations. He wanted facts. That strategy proved far more effective than emotional confrontation. Willow found herself struggling against evidence rather than opinions. Michael referenced communications she believed had remained private. He described meetings she assumed nobody knew about. He mentioned details that should have been impossible for him to discover. Confusion quickly transformed into anxiety. How much did he know? The question dominated Willow's thoughts. More importantly, how had he learned it? Michael seemed almost capable of reading her concerns. Without revealing every source, he made it clear that multiple pieces of information had reached him independently. Separate accounts pointed toward identical conclusions. That fact weakened Willow's ability to dismiss what he was saying. A single misunderstanding could be explained. A pattern was harder to ignore. The conversation shifted toward choices made during recent months. Michael wanted to understand why certain information had been withheld. Why specific conversations never occurred. Why opportunities for honesty had been abandoned. Willow struggled to answer. Not because she lacked explanations. Because every explanation sounded inadequate when spoken aloud. Many decisions that felt reasonable at the time now appeared questionable under scrutiny. Fear. Protectiveness. Uncertainty. Good intentions. Each factor contributed. Yet none erased the consequences. Outside the room, life throughout Port Charles continued as normal. People ate dinner. Families gathered. Businesses prepared to close for the night. Few realized that a confrontation unfolding behind closed doors could soon affect numerous lives. The city had witnessed countless scandals. This one possessed the potential to join the most memorable. Elsewhere, Drew found himself unexpectedly drawn into conversations regarding Michael and Willow. Several recent developments had already complicated his position with multiple members of the Corinthos and Quartermain families. The last thing he needed was additional controversy. Unfortunately, controversy seemed determined to find him anyway. Rumors began circulating. Fragments of information passed between acquaintances. Questions multiplied faster than answers. Nobody knew the complete story. Yet everyone sensed important revelations approaching. Back inside the meeting room, tension reached a new level. Michael finally presented evidence that shattered Willow's remaining confidence. For a brief moment, she stared at the material in stunned silence. The implications were unmistakable. There was no misunderstanding. No confusion. No innocent explanation capable of making everything disappear. Michael had discovered far more than she imagined. A painful realization settled over her. The advantage she believed she possessed was gone. Completely gone. Michael watched the recognition appear in her eyes. He had anticipated this moment for weeks. Despite everything, witnessing it brought no satisfaction. Only sadness. Because confirmation of deception also confirmed the destruction of trust. Trust, once broken, rarely returned unchanged. Willow attempted one final defense. She insisted her intentions had never been malicious. Michael agreed. That response surprised her. He wasn't claiming she intended harm. He was arguing that harm occurred regardless of intent. The distinction mattered. Good intentions did not erase painful consequences. Good intentions did not restore honesty. Good intentions did not automatically justify secrecy. For the first time since arriving, Willow struggled to maintain composure. The emotional walls she spent months constructing began to crack. Memories surfaced. Difficult choices resurfaced. Regrets resurfaced. Each one intensified the pressure already crushing her. Michael remained remarkably controlled. Yet beneath that control, years of disappointment accumulated. Every unanswered question. Every suspicious inconsistency. Every moment he chose trust only to discover another hidden truth. All of it contributed to the confrontation now unfolding. As the evening deepened, neither participant noticed how much time had passed. Minutes blurred together. The outside world faded into irrelevance. Only the conversation mattered. Only the truth mattered. Elsewhere, Carly finally received information confirming her suspicions. Michael and Willow were together. A serious discussion was underway.